Okie doke. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. My name is Seth Paskin, and I'm your host for our ongoing webinar series around best practices and topics that you bring to us here for BMC's performance management, capacity optimization, and security products. Today, our topic is going to be monitoring Java memory utilization with TrueSight Operations Management. And your presenter is Bryan Meranda. Brian's going to introduce himself, cover this topic, and these slides will be made available after the presentation, as well as a recording of this session, which is, just so for your information, it is being recorded. And we'll post all that out on communities, the BMC communities, with a link from the event page where this event was first listed. All right. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Bryan. We're going to turn it over to Bryan. Take it away.
Hello, this is Bryan Meranda. I'm with the Platinum Engineering team, and today we're going to discuss monitoring Java memory utilization with the TrueSight Operations Manager. So let's go ahead and get started. So what are we going to cover? We're going to cover what JMX is, just to give you kind of a brief intro, why we should be monitoring the memory utilization, and then the application that we're going to use is the TrueSight application for actually doing the instrumentation and the configuration of a policy. So we're going to instrument the presentation server, infrastructure manager server, integration servers, and then when we walk through the policy, we'll be configuring a policy to monitor the instrumentation that we set up with the presentation server. What is JMX? Well, JMX is an interface into the Java that allows for interaction and gathering data from the Java process. There are multiple tools that you can use. One of the common tools is the JConsole, which is provided in the Java SDK. In this instance, we're going to be actually leveraging the Patrol agent as the client using the Apache Tomcat and generic Java server KM to go ahead and pull the data from the instrumented JVM so that we can graph that data and we can actually alert off of that. So why do we monitor the Java memory utilization? Well, looking at it from an OS point of view, it's kind of deceiving. You get the heap and non-heap memory and all together, and you're not really sure what's being used by the heap. So being able to instrument the Java process, we can get in, we can look at the heap, non-heap, we can look at garbage collection that's happening. We can gather other information like attributes that are running with the JVM to make sure that all the settings are set the way we want. And it really helps us keep an eye on the Java processes so that we can keep our applications running smoothly. In the case of TrueSight application, we tend to go with the rule of thumb of, we don't want to use more than 85% of our heap allocation for more than 15 minutes. Reasons for that is that means the server is either starting to get to where it needs more memory allocated to the heap. Depending on how the server is configured, it could be configured as a small, medium, or large environment. If it's configured in a medium and we're seeing that the 85% is being breached for more than 15 minutes at a time, then we can go and look at the current settings for the heap allocation and may make adjustments to that to allow for more memory to be used by the heap. The other thing that can happen is if we're configured at a large environment and we're starting to see that we're getting into the 85% range, we may need to look into, in the case of a infrastructure manager server, that the load's reached a point where we need to either go in and tune the system a little bit better, maybe look at the instance and attribute counts that usually are impactful to memory, or may have to bring up another server. This is the same with other applications as well. that that are Java-based, where you would have to determine based on the application, maybe 85 is a low number, and we need to look at maybe a higher number before we feel that we're in a bad place. But this is just the rule of thumb that we have for the TrueSight Infrastructure Manager's server, and the presentation server. So getting into instrumentation of the processes. So the first one we're going to look at is the processes for the presentation server. The file location for the 11 version is in the TrueSight P server comp custom. And it's critical to put the customizations into that the CSR file and the index comp file, so that during upgrade process these settings are preserved. So if you look, when I get into the CSR file, you can see that the VM args system, and then there's a number. That number is sequential. They cannot be duplicated. Our recommendation is that we start any customizations above 501. So just to give a little extra space, I said 520. And then I put in the arguments that are needed to set up the JMX remote interface. So the first one is the port. So by default, we leverage 3333. This port can be configured to map to your environment, but it is particular to that process and cannot overlap any other ports. The SSL we have set to false, and the remote authenticate we have to false as well. There are ways to secure the connections, or you can actually add arguments to say that it's only allowed to connect locally on the box and cannot be connected remotely. These are our default settings that we have. So if you look at the next one, which is, excuse me, the index server. So the index server is the Elasticsearch side of thing, and we can see that we've set that one up on 3334. And you also see that I started the numbering at the 520 again. If you are working on TSPS 10, there is no comp custom, so you will need to put that into the comp services directory for each of those processes. Moving into the infrastructure manager server, you can see the format's a little bit different when we come into this one. So first, we want to do all of our customizations in if it's on Linux /USR PW custom comp. I think most people that work with TrueSight understand where the custom comp directory is. This contains the customizations. Again, this is a place where we can make customizations, and we can preserve those through upgrade process. So if you look at the three processes that are the main ones that we like to keep an eye on, is the PN agent controller. So our agent controller process, we like to keep an eye on. And so we'll go into the PN agent CNTL comp file, and we'll update the, this is a one line. I know it's wrapped around and it looks like it's multiple lines because they all start with DCOM. But this is actually one line. And so if you look at the line in the first, at the end of the first portion of it, you see 9010. That's where we're specifying the port. By default, we use 9010 for the agent controller. If you read through this line a little bit further, you will see that there's a local only, which is false, which means that I can allow for remote connects. After that, you see the JMX remote authenticate. We have it false, meaning that it's not going to require a password to connect. The SSL is false. The last portion of this actually does restrict the connections to only be created locally on the system. So I can only connect to the loopback address. If you want to allow remote connectivity for JConsole or some other tools, or even Patrol Agent doing collection remote, you could remove that portion of the line, so that last argument, the -D Java. And you can do that to the PNJ server, same configuration I just discussed. The only difference is you'll see that it's 9020 for its port number. Moving into the rate, you see that it's a little bit different format here. Again, it looks similar to what we did in the presentation server with the 3 lines. So this is going to be on port 8686, false, and false for the SSL and false for the authentication. One of the things to note is you've seen a couple of different formats so far of how the applications leverage the arguments coming into the JVM. This is particular to the application. Some of these are a little universal where you could actually change them around for the processes. But when you're looking at the processes for things other than TrueSight, it's good to look at the documentation for that application. So the last one we'll look at is the integration server. This one takes a little bit more time to set up because the file doesn't exist in the custom conf directory. So, and I could show an example of this in my demo side. So anyway, so the agent custom conf is where we want this file. So what you'll actually have to do first is copy the PN agent conf from the PW conf directory into the custom conf directory. After you do that, we'll need to remove everything below the fixed section. And then what we'll do is we'll have to add these 3 lines. Again, it's a similar format to what we saw for rate, where we have the port is 8989, false and false for SSL and for the authentication. So this will allow remote connectivity. So next, we're going to go ahead and walk through some screenshots of creating a policy, and then after that, we'll open up for some questions, and then I can actually show some live looking at the policies and any configuration files. So for this, we're not going to go through each of the different portions. So we're just going to do the presentation server as an example. There will be, when we post the slides, there's some backup slides that you'll be able to look at that actually talk about configuring for the TSIM server and for the integration services. So as we go through here, we'll just talk about the presentation server. So one of the first things that you need to do is you need to deploy a patrol agent. It needs to have the Apache Tomcat and generic Java server KM on that agent. Another prerequisite is to either add the Java package that we have in the repository, which is Oracle JRE, or you can point to your own JRE that's on the system. It does need to be version 8 or greater, so that's a prerequisite for you. The other thing that we like to do is we like to set tags for managing who's going to get this policy. So for the presentation server, the tag that I chose was TSPS-monitoring. So I have applied that and created a .current file with that tag information. And so after that, when I'm creating my policy, one of my first things I need to look at is one of the first things I do is, after naming it, is to give it a selection criteria. So by using the TSPS monitoring, since it's applied to that agent, as soon as that agent comes online and this policy is active, it'll get the configuration of this policy. This really helps out more when it's TSIM servers and it's the integration servers, because you'll have more of them. But it's an easy way to manage, who's going to get this policy. So as we go into the configuration, we'll select the monitoring solution, which is the Apache Tomcat and generic Java server. We'll get the latest version, and then we'll select generic JVM server. After that, the monitor type that's the only monitor type you can have. If you look down at the bottom portion of this right now, it's talking about the Java home. So you'll want to define the Java home. This will be for this this configuration. So it'll be for both ports that we're going to monitor on the TSPS. So we'll go ahead and we'll set the Java value here. And here it's my base install of Patrol. I actually use the Patrol package to install the JRE. So this would be a similar format that would have. So now we want to give it the information on the process that we're actually going to be monitoring. So the first process we're going to configure will be the core process. So I called it TSPS-core. That's going to be kind of a top-level application class under the generic Java server monitoring, so that I know which process that I want to look at. I indicate 127 as 0.0.1. That's because now, as long as I'm running this local on all the agents that are going to be part of the TSPS, the TSIMs, and so on, if I put the loop back, that way I don't have to have a specific entry for every single host name. You can put a host name here if you're going to be doing this remote. The RMI server type, we just leave just the generic setting of JMX RMI. And username, password, as we talked earlier, the authentication was set to false, so we're not going to be using that. And the SSL certificate details, we also had that false in the instrumentation portion, so those will be left blank. Now we have the indexer, so I'm going to call it the TSPS indexer. Again, I'm using the 127.0.0.1, and the rest of the settings are the same. We talked earlier when we first started about, our recommendations from a TSOM point of view of what we think that memory allocation, the level where we should start, raising some concern. So we talked about that it was 85% of the utilization. So in this situation, in this configuration, we've chosen to use a patrol agent threshold. And when we add that patrol agent threshold, here's the dialog that would come up in the settings that we would set. So you would do the monitor solution version and monitor type, which are the Apache, Tomcat, and generic Java server. And then the JVM memory utilization gets us to the application class that we're concerned about, which is the JVM heap utilization that we really want to get. So you see that the memory utilization is listed there. So we've selected that attribute. And then if you look down, it says threshold 1. So threshold 1, we want to enable that. We want that to be a critical event if it's between the min of 85 and max 100. The triggering of the event, so if this happens to spike up to 90% and then goes back down to 70%, we're not going to alert on that. It has to be 3 consecutive collections or 15 minutes in that state before we'll get an alert. The other thing that we like to do is we like to group these things together. So for the presentation server, infrastructure manager server, and our integration servers, we'll assign them all to a group called TrueSight Infrastructure. The name is of your choice, and then we'll tell it to associate devices. That way, when I go in to a group called TrueSight Infrastructure, I will see all the components. So if I had 15 integration servers and 2 TSIM servers, and then my presentation servers, and all of those would show up underneath the same group, just as an easy way to look at some of the events. So that's what I had for the presentation today, and then next I'll go into some live looking at the policies. Seth, is there any questions that I need to answer prior to doing that?
Nope. We've had a couple in the Q&A box, and Todd and team have taken care of those. So.
Sounds great.
There's a question. Do we have documentation for this? You have that in your presentation, right? Links to documentation.
So there's not anything specific other than what we're going to produce here, and then we're going to produce a KA out of this that will have the specific instructions.
Okay. Great. And Lee, yes, we will provide the slides afterwards.
Yes. And as I said, there's backup slides to this as well that does talk about how to configure the same things that we've done. We instrumented everything at the beginning, but going through the steps of creating the policies, we've actually got its background slide or some backup slides. And then I will provide, there is a link that I'll provide a little bit of information on how to secure the connection. But I think that's going to be released more when we get to more in depth when we get to a KA. We'll update the KA in the future with securing the connection. Bright screen. So just going to kind of walk through just a little bit of, what we've configured and set up and what you can go look at. So starting off, when you implement the generic Java collection, it'll create an application class underneath your host. So my host is this MR. So I have a generic JVM. When I open that up, I see my two processes that I had configured. So these are the two that we instrumented and created the policy for. I didn't show the policy creation except for the screenshots, but I called it TSPS core, TSPS indexer, so that I could come in easily and find them. The one that we really want to watch is underneath memory. There is heap memory usage. This is one of the key ones we look at, and I've got the graph here. I can refresh it to an hour. So we can see it's collecting every 5 minutes. And so if it does get into a bad place of 85% or higher, we'll go back to the 4 hour. So we can see here I was at 82%. Here I was at 85%. I was at 87%. And so I think, I know I didn't get an alarm because this was 84. So this went up, but then there was a garbage cleanup that happened. So a couple things that I can see here. I can see the garbage collection seems to be working pretty well. It's going up and down in the graph, which means that I'm allocating memory, I'm utilizing memory. So this is my percentage. I'm using, and then I clean up, and then I use, and then I clean up. So this actually looks pretty healthy for the system. It also shows the memory committed. So it's 4.2 gig approximately that's being committed to, meaning committed, currently allocated to the process. Memory usage in KB. So you'll see these two lines kind of follow each other. So the percentage and the KB and the actual memory utilization kind of follow each other in a pattern. So wanted to just kind of step through just from a live point of view and show you the different screens in case you're not familiar with them. And some of the things, just some comments around how I created this policy that may benefit you as well. So even though that I'm doing just the Apache is what I showed during the configuration, there are some Linux things that I do as well. So I actually did configure the Linux to monitor the base Linux. It's also going to do some process monitoring because I still do want to look at the processes from a OS point of view. It's just I really need to get more detailed information. And then I also monitored the storage. So it's a basic configuration for my TSPS to have my Apache configured. I've got my TSPS core and indexer. And then when I went into processes, I did it the core and indexer as well, so that I have a view of not only from the JVM side, even though I feel that that's the more critical, I also see what the OS thinks is going on, which gives me the overall from the OS point of view. So that's how I configured the presentation server. And then the packages that I created that I had talked to you about earlier was one, which is just a JGS. So I just have this package, meaning that I either have Java on the system already, or meaning I have Java on the system already. Either it's already been deployed from Patrol, or I have Java that I've installed myself. And then the other one that I created was the Oracle with Oracle. And this one has the Apache, and I also selected the Oracle JRE. So that's what I had. Is there any other questions that have come up?
Yes. So Bryan, Lee is asking just which KMs did you use deployed to start this process? He missed the first part.
Okay, yeah. So it's the Java generic, the Apache Tomcat and generic Java server. So I can go down to repository. I think I'm already on that screen, but so it's this one here. I actually have got a newer version now, but it's just Apache Tomcat and generic Java server is what it is. 3.1 is when I started, and then there was an update that I got, which is the 3.1.01.
Okay. This probably it's worth excavating. Mindy had asked, is this in addition to the self-monitoring, because the self-monitoring does some JVM monitoring? Todd had already answered that yes, it's an addition, but can you explain the difference between what you get with self-monitoring versus this?
Yeah, so I'm not sure exactly which self-monitoring, so let me just go through a couple of things. So the self-monitoring where the PNet agent is collecting data does not get into the Java level. From a self-monitoring, it's more of a OS level memory CPU utilization. So the other self-monitoring that we have, and we're expanding on self-monitoring, that's why I want to talk through a little bit of it, just to make sure that we're clear, is then you have the TSIM self-monitoring, which actually looks at some of the different processes, looks at cell configuration, looks at, or not configuration, but cell activity, looks at I think it looks at the database as well. And then we have for the TSPS where we can get instance counts and different things. We've also expanded with some of the Platinum Engineering team where Todd had worked on creating a KM that actually goes in and looks at things other than even what we're looking at from the Java. So in addition to the Java and the self-monitoring, and I am drawing a blank on the name of what we call the KM, but it actually will go in and tell you the load across. So you have an integration server, how many agents are connected. You have a TSIM server, how many instances and attributes does it have? And so looking at different things at different levels. So we continue to increase the self-monitoring, but this is in addition to the self-monitoring that we have currently. Now, some customers have already implemented this because I've shared this with other customers over time. But we wanted to get this in a bigger forum to get this out and get customers engaged with it to make sure that their systems are running healthy.
Great. All right, thank you for that clarification. Todd is actively typing away, but let me go ahead and scroll down and make sure we, let's see. So this is a question. Folk had asked, can we do this remotely with JMX and the KM?
Yes, you can. The reason I did it locally was for a couple reasons. I really like, I personally like the patrol agent being on the system that I'm monitoring. There are some times when we don't do that. You know, may it be virtualization or other things that the manufacturer doesn't suggest, or we just feel we don't want to put that extra load on. In this case, I like to have a patrol agent on all of my infrastructure manager servers, either the ISN or the TSPS or the TSIMs themselves, TSPS, TSIMs, and ISNs. One reason is because the way that I showed on creating the monitoring policy, if I have one or I have 100 integration servers, you're not going to have 100, but just as a number, I create one policy and I'm done. I make sure that the KM's there, the Java's there, agent's ready to go. I push out this policy. I tag those machines properly. Every ISN I bring online. So if I have 3 ISNs today that are tagged, they come up, they're being monitored. I bring up another ISN because I'm getting to a scale and I need to put another one behind a load balancer. I bring up that next ISN, I put the tag on it, automatically starts monitoring my Java. Threshold's already there. If I'm doing it remote, which is not bad either, I'm not saying it's bad, you can do it remote. And so in the configuration that we were looking at, the right screen, let me just bring up another policy screen. Infrastructure policy. So if I go into ISN, I edit it, where I configured the ISN, I didn't show you the ISN, so here's the ISN. Configure the ISN, I have a port here. I have my 1027.0.0.1. That gives me the flexibility of having the tag agents already there and it starts collecting. I can create this same policy. I can have one agent where I specify the name of each of my servers, give it an environment name. So the environment name would have to be unique. So it may be hostname-ISN1, hostname-ISN2, hostname-ISN3. You give it the port, and you're able to remote monitor. So the other thing to take into consideration when you're doing that, so let me go back to the slides for a moment. When we're looking at this configuration screen, we're looking at this screen because of the fact that on the presentation server, I didn't put any restrictions to the server name being 127.0.0.1. These are able to be connected remote, and again, with no password. When I get into the TSEM server, one of the comments I made was this last variable. So if you look at the pnagent cntl.com, remember that's a one-liner. It looks like it repeats because all of them start with the -dcom. But if you look at the last line at the very end of that line, you have the -d-java.rmi.server.hostname equals 1027.0.0.1. The current configuration of uncommenting this is the fact that that will say I can only accept a connection locally on the box. So if you do want to do this remotely, you'll remove, after SSL equals false, you'll remove the rest of that line for the agent controller and the J server, and then you'll be able to connect remotely. What I usually suggest is, use some tools to make sure that, well, one, you can do a netstat -ANO on there looking for the port that's configured, 9010 and 8686, and you'll see that it's either listening on a 0.0.0.0, which means it's open to any interface, or you'll see it restricted to 127.0.0.1. That's one way to check it. You can use the JConsole to do a remote connect just to see if that connectivity is there. I would check that, and then there's other things you can do. You can do some port checks to make sure that that port's accessible remotely. So keep in mind firewalls and things like that can be in place. So I usually, before I configure the KM, I use one of those other tools just to make sure that I have that connectivity to that port.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. There's quite a few questions coming in, but one that's we've got a couple versions of is basically, what other applications can you use this for besides TrueSight? Can you use it for other TrueSight solutions, for Remedy?
Yes, so it's a very good question. So this is geared towards TrueSight infrastructure for what we're trying to monitor. This is a Java implementation. This is not something specific we did for TrueSight. So Java applications will have different configurations and arguments that you can give them so that you can look at their interface. So these are not BMC specific. These are very open. I mean, if you go search for sun.management.jmx remote, you're going to see a bunch of articles. So I think one of the things that maybe would help is if I put a couple of the links from the Oracle pages that I've used in the past. I'll put those in the backup slides as well. So Seth, before we create that, let me add a couple of additional page or so that just got some websites that they can get to. But this is Java, and this is just Java. So Remedy runs Java. So yes, all of our TrueSight. Now, can you do this to the Patrol Agent? No, you can't, because Patrol Agent is running as C code. So it is a Java implementation. So it should be universal. Now, as we called it, it's instrumenting the code. So when the Java process executes, I mean, if you look at, I think I have a window up, I can show this. So this is, so if I do sorry, let me go to this machine over here. This is the argument that launches the Java process. So if you look at this line right starting here, I know it's a lot of information, but these are the settings that I set when I started this process. So I told it that my port was going to be 9020. I told it the DCOM sunsetting for local only was going to be false. So when I say instrumenting, this does bring in other arguments into the command line for that process. So, I mean, you'll need to work with your application owner to make sure that they're, one, okay with that. I do not know of any performance impacts by implementing this. It also gives you the ability to, you know, even from a troubleshooting, not TSOM, but troubleshooting a Java application, gives you the ability to have this, being able to open up an interface from JConsole or one of the other tools, and a developer be able to see what's loaded, what are the arguments that are being used by, in a friendly format, what are the arguments that are being leveraged in this application. What's the memory allocation? So you're able to get a lot of detailed information on that application when you open up this interface. I hope that answered the question for you.
Okay, thank you. We have another question about, is Java monitoring available for the EUEM 11.x product? So I guess the question is, can we do the same monitoring on that?
Yeah, so I honestly, I don't know. It's a Java application, so my answer would be yes, unless it's restricted by the application, that this would be able to be configured. We may need to get a case opened up so that we can, I mean, we look in the documentation. I haven't done it for the EUEM, but if we may have to open up a case just because of the fact that I'm not sure where you would set the arguments. I have custom comp files where I set some things, and I know I can go in and set them there. I'm not sure in the EUEM where I would give those startup arguments so that it would be active. One thing you may do is look at the process that's currently running, just like I did, and see if you see any of the JMX remote settings in there. So that might be something you start off with looking at. It may be wherever you set your memory as well. So if you look, I've got, you know, here's my memory settings. So I mean, there's a lot in this command line. It tells me the GCs and different things. So you may look at where you're setting your garbage collect and where you're setting your memory allocation for min and max. Maybe a place where you see, oh, I see the format, I understand the format. And maybe you'll be able to set it there. Again, all of these things should be done in a test dev environment, not in production. Until after you've got the command lines the way that you want, then definitely implement it into your production environment.
I think that's good advice always. Okay, let me see. We've got Volker also asked, are there differences between different JVMs, like if you use a JVM besides Oracle's? Are there differences you need to take into account?
I would say maybe. One of the things that, you know, as the Java has gone to a different way of being able to be distributed, we are looking at using other components. That's one thing that I want to look into. And what I would say is, I don't know how, Seth, if we do any amending to where we could maybe upload the deck again that maybe has some of those comments or make some comments on the page, or we just handle it through the KA. But I think that it's a valid question. I think that my answer is it should work. It's Java in the back end. What I'm not sure of is, how the interfaces. So can I use a JConsole from Java into an Azul JRE or into a JVM? Not sure. I need to look into that. So I don't know for sure. I think that we'll have some updates on that in the near future.
Yeah, that's great. And to answer your question, Brian, or to comment on it, obviously we can put it in the KA and update that. But when we post this out on communities, that's a living document. So folks on the phone, you can of course post questions in communities against the event or the recording when we upload the slides and all that, whatever you would like to do.
That's great. I didn't realize that, so that's great.
Mm-hmm. So we have another question from, I'm going to say, Acute. In Windows, you see a number of processes running for Java. How can we monitor that? Can you show once? And so can you show an example of monitoring multiple Java processes maybe? I'm not sure what the...
No, I get the question. So I will say, give me a second. And Todd, I'm going to use your machine. And since he's on mute, he can't tell me now.
Todd, you want me to unmute you?
I think. This is one of the machines up.
Oh, he's unmuted. Todd's unmuted if he wants to.
Oh, okay. Which machine do you want to use, Brian?
6UP, SNO. Yeah, okay, thanks.
If you're looking for a TSIM server, that ain't it, though.
No, I'm just going to show the multiple processes that are. I think I can hear the question here.
Yeah.
Actually, your TSIM actually would be better. So your TSIM is TY. Yep, I got that one too. Thanks. So just give me a second while it's coming out.
Hey, while you're waiting for that to go up, Brian, we've got a question out here from Volker about working with mbeans.
Yep.
You might understand what that means. I don't. Can we monitor, execute mbeans as well to get data?
I'm not sure if we can execute. I thought that, and I thought that was WebSphere WebLogic, that they did more of an mbean. This is really more of just a generic server. So I think it's actually a different solution that he's looking for. But it may be a WebSphere WebLogic. I would have to look at the KM a little bit further to get into that type of monitoring.
Okay.
So I assume this is what we're talking about. I've got multiple Java processes running. I really have no clue what they are. So if I go over to details and I look at the Java, here I can distinguish because we name our wrappers differently. So if you're not getting, I'm assuming you mean just from a process point of view, because if you're talking about the from a JMX point of view, during startup you would monitor that process based on the port that you assigned it, even if they all said Java, and I assigned it a port of 8686, 8687, I had these ports. I would just connect to the port, and I would know which process I'm going to based on the configuration that I gave it.
And we let's label it. Right, so from a TrueSight perspective, I would be able to label it, therefore be able to recognize it more so than I know what he's making reference to. At some apps, you look and all you see is Java, 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 Java.
Right. So the other way to look at it is, well, one, you can label, absolutely. So just like the labeling I did, I picked the port and I told it what it was going to be. So I knew that it was going to be, agent controller. I knew it was going to be, the core process, the index process. One thing you can do is you can look at image path and command line, which sometimes, I'll leave the image path off, but I'll just put the command line. Once you turn on the command line, you can then see more of the process. So if you were wanting to do this from an OS point of view, so let's just say you wanted them, let's just pretend all these are Java. None of them have the underscore after it. You could go in and look for distinctions in the command line that may lead you to what it is. So in this one, so this is agent controller. Somewhere there's probably something that says D-D agent. I don't see it, but anyway, this is how you should go in and start looking for that. Again, the command lines like this one I have out here, it's a mile long. But with ours, we've made the distinction of giving it a wrapper name instead of just Java. But you should be able to come in and look at here and look for different arguments. If all of your Java processes are the same argument, from an OS point of view, I'm not sure how you would do that. Other than assigning a port for a port through the instrumentation.
And I put Brent forwarded me a hyperlink for Volker related to the MBean question.
Okay, so you posted that in the.
Yeah, I put it in the Q&A.
Okay, great, thank you.
All right. Well, we've gone 15 minutes over, and we still have a good chunk of folks. So I want to thank everybody for their participation. Volker, you've got a lot of great questions. I think maybe we might need to follow up with you and help answer some of those. So just post them in the communities page after we post the deck if you've got any lingering questions. And we're going to follow up on a couple of items. So we've got the EUEM question, and the KA needs to come out, and we're going to do some research on. We're going to add some detail to that as we go forward. Bryan, terrific presentation, and for everybody who attended, thank you so much. So I'm going to go ahead and close it out now. Let me just remind you that it takes me a couple of days to get the recording translated into the correct format and posted on communities. So you should have gotten an email with a link to the communities event. If not, you can just go search the title of the presentation, the title of the the session on communities and find it. Or follow me, Seth Paskin, and you can find my content and you'll find that. And so we'll be doing this again in another couple of weeks. And you'll be getting notification via email in about a week about what that session is going to be on. And thanks, everybody. Thanks, Todd, and everybody else for helping out with the questions.
Sure.
And everybody have a terrific week.
Great.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.